Hey folks, it's William with All Solar Texas. The Texas heat wave is finally upon us, which means only one thing: expect power outages. But if you want to learn how to survive the next big Texas power outage, stay tuned and I'll tell you how in this video. Alright, but before we dive in, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and don't forget to tap on that notification bell. That keeps you up to date with all the latest energy news that we produce here on the channel, and it does help us out with YouTube a little bit. Lastly, reach out to us. Please give us a call, send us an email, check out our website. Whether or not you're an existing solar customer or if you're a potential solar customer and you just want to be treated fairly and get a good deal, reach out to us. We can't wait to hear from you and we respond quickly. Alright folks, well, the Texas heat wave is upon us. If you're like me, you've already been getting notification emails from ERCOT asking you to conserve energy. They want you to turn up your thermostats. They want you to minimize your electric consumption. Now, ERCOT is primarily responsible for maintaining a balance between that electricity demand and capacity, making sure that there's enough electricity being produced, but not too much, just to meet the need at that particular time without putting too much power onto the grid and stressing it even further. The problem is that ERCOT is working off of forecasts and projections, and so they're going to be asking you to make some decisions on your own personal comfort. Now, what do I mean when I talk about demand versus capacity? Well, the grid in Texas is over 100 years old. Literally, I've worked on these lines, I've worked on these towers and these substations, and I can tell you it is a maze, a web of different parts and components that all wear out over time. You have poles in the ground carrying distribution line that's over 100 years old. The utilities really are incentivized to maintain this equipment only up to a certain point. So of course they conduct inspections on this equipment. They want to make sure that at least they meet the bare minimum requirements for operations and maintenance of that utility. But really there's a large capital cost that comes into making the types of grid overhauls and the upgrades that would be needed to prevent power outages in the future, which means only one thing: power outages are going to continue. Now, why is that? Well, let's take a look at that 100-year-old grid. This entire grid, this big web, is very, very fragile. Over time, due to weatherization, due to high heat, due to weather, due to degradation, those little bits and pieces, those parts and those components break down. You could have a transformer that becomes overloaded and blows up. You could have a wire that gets rusted and just, drops that line right on the ground. You could have insulators that fail, that really don't protect these big surges that could take down other parts of that utility grid. And so with all of this big wide web of grid, with the increased demand that is placed upon it from customers, not only just people that are here in Texas that are using it to power their homes, but also businesses. You have farmers that are putting a high demand on that grid. And with millions of people moving to Texas every year, the grid isn't getting younger. The grid isn't getting stronger. When utilities need to take a look at what types of improvements to make, they have to do a cost-benefit analysis. It takes years to go through the design process when making a utility upgrade. You now need to purchase materials. Those materials are very expensive and they take a long time to get here. Plus, we're looking at permitting, we're looking at land rights, in some cases land acquisition. All of these different aspects related to making the types of needed investments into the grid to make it more reliable cost a lot of money and take a lot of time, which is why the utility companies are so far behind schedule in making the needed upgrades, which means one thing: the grid is going to continue to fail. It's going to continue to leave you, the customer, in the dark. So what can we do about it? Well, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do to get the utilities to move faster or to keep pace with making the type of grid modernizations that's needed to really accommodate the increased demand that's being placed on that grid by millions of new people moving here every year, and by the amazing growth that we're seeing in the commercial sector here in Texas. So it leaves it up to the individual homeowner. Now, when you go with solar and you also support that solar system with some kind of backup option like a backup power generator or a backup battery, you are increasing your own reliance on the power that you produce and not so reliant on the grid and the power that the utilities produce. Now, a question that we often get here at All Solar Texas is what's the difference between a power brownout and a power blackout? Well, they're both considered losses in power. But with the brownout, what happens is the utility needs to make a selection. So if they have increased demand coming onto the system, they know that the grid is going to fail in the weakest potential part. So before it fails, before that grid breaks down, if there's increased demand from a customer base, plus you have a weather condition like a very high heat wave coming in that's going to add additional stresses onto that grid, they will voluntarily identify customers to shut power off just to reduce the amount of demand that is on that section of the grid, which means that the power company is going to choose winners and losers, who gets power and who gets shut off. And that power remains shut off for hours, sometimes days, just to offset the amount of stress that is on the grid, because they know it will fail if there's too much stress and they want to prevent a failure from occurring. So they voluntarily, proactively shut people's power down. Now, typically who stays energized during one of these brownouts are your critical facilities. So the utility has a list of critical facilities. These are places like schools, hospitals, prisons, normally government buildings that are considered high priority. And so what they'll do is they'll make sure that those types of facilities stay energized, but then they'll go ahead and de-energize normal customers in other different parts of their territory that maybe don't need it. And that includes businesses. That is different from a blackout. What a blackout is it is power outage due to grid failure. So that means that a line broke somewhere and hit the ground. It means a pole fell over. It means a certain part or component of that entire web of the grid failed somehow. Maybe a transformer overloaded and blew up, right? That's what causes a power outage. So a power outage is when there's damage to the grid, which results in lost power, and then the utility then needs to go back out and fix it. But a brownout is their proactive approach to shutting down people's power proactively before it leads to a grid failure, because grid failures are much more expensive to deal with. So it's easier to shut the power down for certain customers than it is to spend the millions of dollars to go and send people out to actually repair the grid once it's already failed. Either way, it leaves you, the customer, with no power. It leaves you, the customer, in the dark. And whether or not you are a homeowner or a business owner or a teacher or you work from home, right? You are impacted by these power outages, and it is the utility that picks the winners and the losers. So one of the questions that we get is, well, if I put in a solar system, will that prevent a blackout? Well, yes and no. When power outages occur, your solar system is designed to disconnect from the grid as a safety measure. We don't want the power being generated from your solar system to backfeed into the lines where there's people working to repair those lines and causing a safety incident or possibly killing someone. So it's designed to separate itself from the grid. However, with the new IQ8 in-phase microinverters, it produces about 1 amp of power that's able to continue to power your very low voltage household items during an outage as long as the sun is still up. So that does give you a backup power option. Now, for your money, and depending upon where you're at in terms of what your preferences are for a source of backup power, a generator is an amazing option for backup power. Or you could take a look at solar batteries. Those are those nice backup batteries that connect to your solar system that gives you that 100% clean energy as a source of backup power during an outage. Either way, as a customer, whether or not you are a homeowner or you're a business owner, you need to take a look at backup power options. We know that the grid is not getting any younger. We know that the utilities cannot make the type of investments, nor are they willing to make the types of investments quick enough in order to improve the reliability of the grid. And even after they've made those capital investments over the next 10, 15 years, they're now going to pass those costs down to you, the customers. Now, what's the two primary differences between a backup battery and a backup generator? Well, there's a nice video that I'll go ahead and drop a link to the description below where I talk about the differences between backup generators and backup batteries and the pros and cons of selecting each. All right, thank you so much for joining us today, but before you take off, please make sure to drop a comment below and let us know what's the worst part about being in a power outage for you. I can't wait to hear from you, and I'll respond quickly. Lastly, reach out to us, send us an email, check out our website, give us a call. We're here for you, and we can't wait to talk to you. Thank you so much, and God bless.